I cheated on my husband with my boss, got pregnant twice, forced him to pay child support, but after my affair crumbled and my lover died, my husband took his final revenge, and now I'm left in a wheelchair, regretting everything I lost. I betrayed my partner with my boss. I became pregnant by him on 2 occasions and still had my husband provide child support, but he had his payback. My lover passed away, and now I reside in a wheelchair. I'm Andrea, 34 years old, and despite what might seem contradictory, I've always viewed myself as a person of principle. I first encountered Carlos, my former husband, as a child in the neighborhood in Tijuana, where we grew up. Our mothers were friends, so our connection developed naturally. He was the quintessential reserved, honorable type of man who would offer his jacket even on a warm day. We were close friends for years until our teenage years when we began dating. It wasn't the most thrilling bond, but it was steady. Everyone around us claimed we were destined for each other, and I believed them. Our first split happened during our junior year of high school. I felt a sense of restlessness and longed to experience that fluttery feeling again, to encounter something novel. We were separated for a little over a month. During that period, I dated an older guy who attended a different school. It didn't last long, but it ignited something within me. When I reconciled with Carlos, he welcomed me with his customary affection, as if nothing had occurred. That left an impression on me. I felt potent and desired. He, on the other hand, never posed questions. He was simply grateful for my presence. In college, we parted ways once more. This time, I explored further. Carlos desired a quiet relationship, while I craved partying, freedom, and delving into all that university life presented. During this second separation, I dated several men from my academic field. And yes, I moved beyond just flirting. I had intense experiences, some almost wild, and I felt truly alive. But ultimately, as always, I returned to Carlos's embrace, and he accepted me again as if I were untouched, as if nothing had happened. Perhaps that's what drew me back, the security. Carlos graduated with a civil engineering degree and secured a good position at a construction firm. I studied business administration and joined a technology company. We lived an ordinary existence, stability, routine, future plans. We decided to marry immediately after graduation. Our ceremony was modest but lovely. He shed tears at the altar. I did too, not from joy, but from apprehension. A dread of committing too soon, of losing the intensity one was still pursuing. Yet I proceeded. After all, isn't stability what we all seek? Early in our marriage, we made a pact. No children until we reached 31. We wished to travel, advance professionally, and enjoy our marriage. And of course, he also believed we were waiting to make intimacy more special. The problem was that even after we were married, our physical connection remained tepid. I would feign pleasure. I would pretend and say I preferred making love to having sex. In truth, I longed for something more rugged, more unrestrained, more carnal. I had experienced it in college with men who didn't love me, but somehow, it still smoldered inside me. Carlos was always exceedingly respectful. He never raised his voice at me, never questioned me, never demanded anything. That should have been positive, shouldn't it? But it had the opposite effect on me. I felt unseen, not as a woman, but as a person desired. While he was busy paying bills, giving me flowers, and planning trips, I found myself dreaming of things that couldn't be acquired. A lustful glance, a tug of the hair, physical intimacy without love, and purely driven by desire. And that was the beginning of the end, though he didn't know it yet. Nor did I completely. Outwardly, we were the perfect couple. Friends, family, colleagues, everyone praised us. They were made for each other, they would say, and I would smile because that was the expectation. But internally, I felt torn between genuine affection and pure desire, between tranquility and turbulence. And as much as I tried to ignore this division, it grew like a fissure beneath our feet. I wasn't unfaithful to Carlos then, but I lied daily. I pretended to be content when my heart and my body yearned for something he could never provide. The pregnancy caught me by surprise. I was 27, and although I told everyone it had been an accident, deep down I knew it wasn't. I already felt confined in that stifling calmness. A child seemed like a way to alter the marriage's energy, to give things new purpose. But it wasn't a plan that suited Carlos, who strictly adhered to our pact of waiting until 31. When I saw the positive result, a slight panic washed over me, but I concealed it well. I claimed the flu medicine must have interfered with the birth control, and he believed me. Of course, Carlos was thrilled with the news. I remember him kneeling before me and kissing my belly even before the ultrasound. It was sweet, it was tender, and it was everything any woman would want. But inside, I could only contemplate how everything was going to change, and not precisely as he imagined. During the pregnancy, he was even more devoted. He massaged my feet, read me books on fatherhood, and spoke to the baby every night. And I smiled, but a part of me felt it fading away little by little. Diego was born healthy and beautiful. Carlos cried like a baby when he held him for the first time. I cried, too, but for a different reason. This should have made me feel complete, fulfilled as a mother and wife. Instead, I felt overwhelmed, exhausted, and disconnected. I returned to work just 5 weeks later, not out of necessity, but for my mental well-being. Motherhood didn't fulfill me. The household routine irritated me. And although Carlos was still the exemplary father and perfect husband, I no longer knew how to genuinely be his wife. Less than a year later, I discovered another pregnancy. Once again, it was unexpected, at least for him. I knew Carlos desired children close in age. So when I realized I had been careless, I didn't hesitate. I told him it too had been an accident, and he smiled. Valeria was born strong, determined, and with a gaze that seemed to know everything. This time, Carlos became even more involved. He changed diapers, warmed bottles, and watched cartoons on the living room floor with the children on his lap. While he was building the house of his dreams, I dreamt of being elsewhere. At work, everything was going well. I was promoted shortly after returning from my second maternity leave. I worked at a technology company and interacted directly with managers from other areas. It was then that I started to engage more with Ernesto, my direct superior. He was distinct from Carlos, direct, bold, with a look that communicated everything. There were no obvious signs yet, but the way he treated me moved me. I tried to ignore it, but every time I came home, I felt the stark contrast between the man who desired me with his gaze and the one who adored me in silence. At home, the routine was flawless. The coffee was ready. The children were clean. The bills were paid. Physical intimacy at least 3 times a week. Carlos did everything he could to please me. There was no lack of affection or presence. And yet, I felt an emptiness that I couldn't fill. It was like living in a margarine advertisement while my body was screaming for something more potent, more unrefined. I started to fantasize, to get lost in my thoughts during showers, during meetings. I felt a little guilty, but the truth is that I had been beyond the ordinary for a long time. While life proceeded on its perfect course in the eyes of others, a tempest was brewing inside me. I began to ponder if Carlos's love was enough to satisfy a woman like me, if such a well-ordered home was capable of stifling the most intense desires, if a quiet routine was not actually a gilded cage. And deep down, I already knew the answer. I was not only married to Carlos, I was married to everyone's expectations. But what no one imagined was that I was about to cross a point of no return, a boundary that would change everything. That Tuesday seemed like any other Tuesday. The children were at school, and I told them I would be working late. In fact, Ernesto was due to arrive home around 4 in the afternoon. We had been meeting there for just over 2 months, always cautiously, with the windows barely open, just a single lamp, and the lights off. But that day, there was no rush. Ernesto arrived with a bottle of inexpensive wine, and that cynical smile that disarmed me. We had all the time in the world, or so we thought. What I didn't know, and neither did he, was that Carlos's company had gone bankrupt shortly after takeoff. He didn't even leave the airport for his destination. He took the first flight back, and instead of telling me, he decided to surprise me. He dropped the car off at the workshop for a checkup and took a transport service straight home. He arrived at 5:15 in complete silence. He opened the door with a spare key he had hidden in the garden and went straight to the kitchen. And that's when everything erupted. As soon as he walked in, Ernesto had his hands under my blouse, and my skirt was already up to my thighs. We were laughing at a crude joke. I remember exactly what he said. "You're going to drive me crazy on that sofa." The silence of the house was broken by the click of Carlos's cell phone. He took 5 photos before we realized someone was there. When we noticed, he was motionless with a cold expression. Ernesto froze. I tried to cover myself in a hurry. Carlos said nothing. He simply left the room and went to the landline phone we still used out of habit. When I heard him dialing, I realized he was calling Isabella. I panicked. I screamed that this would only worsen things, that he should think about our children. I threatened him with child support, custody, and legal action. I told him he could lose his job and that he could also get into trouble if he reported Ernesto. I was desperate, but he just looked at me with disgust and said, "You dug your own grave." Ernesto ran out, still buttoning his shirt. Carlos didn't even care. He was too focused on destroying me with words. He took out his cell phone and showed me the photos. He said he already had everything he needed. Without thinking, I tried to snatch it from him. It was instinctive, but he moved away. He said he would show it to everyone, starting with Isabella and then the company's human resources department. I begged, I cried, I humiliated myself. I said it was a mistake, that I felt lonely, that he was emotionally distant, that it was his fault too. It was useless. He was blinded by rage. And for the first time in years, I realized that Carlos was capable of hatred. Not the passive-aggressive kind, but pure destructive animosity. He didn't sleep at home that night. He didn't even look at me again. He just took his car keys, which had already passed inspection, and left. I was left alone, perspiring, with the scent of wine and betrayal clinging to my skin. And the only thing going through my head was, now what? What comes after this? The day after the discovery, Carlos came home as if he had entered a minefield. He didn't yell. He didn't explode. He simply spoke with a coldness I had never seen in him. He said he had photos, proof that he had already spoken to Isabella and that she, unlike me, had the decency to cry in silence. I tried to explain myself. I sat with him in the kitchen where we had coffee every Sunday morning, and I let it all out at once, that it was not love, that it never was, that I just wanted something different, something he could not give me. He didn't say a word for several minutes. He just looked at me. His gaze was a mixture of anger, disappointment, and a certain disgust, as if he were looking at a stranger. I kept talking, not out of courage, but out of desperation. I said that since college, I had missed out on more intense experiences. That Ernesto was just an escape valve. I admitted that during our breakups, I had lived through things that marked me, men with more attitude, more drive, more control. Experiences that made me question if Carlos's calmness was enough for me. He asked me in a low but firm voice, "Have you done this before?" I swallowed hard. I said no during the marriage, but yes before, during our breaks, and that those moments marked me more than I would like to admit. I didn't expect him to understand, but I thought that by being honest, I would at least open a path to rebuild. What a fool. Carlos simply got up, grabbed a pillow, and went straight to the guest room. Sleep alone today, and for the next few days too. The house became a cemetery of feelings. He avoided any eye contact, spoke as little as possible, only about the children. He even avoided sharing rooms with me. That made me more desperate than if he were screaming. The silent rage of a broken man is worth more than 1,000 blows, and I knew he was broken. But at the same time, inside me, there was a voice that said, "You just showed who you really are." A cruel but true voice. I had always been two people, the one he loved and the one he would never fully know. I started to notice small changes. He started coming home late from work. He locked his phone. He changed all the passwords. It was as if he were already erasing me from his world, little by little. One day, I saw him taking his formal clothes and hanging them in the guest room closet. I asked him if it was temporary, and he replied, "I do not feel comfortable with you anymore." I tried to tell him we could go to therapy, talk, seek help. He laughed a dry laugh and replied, "You had the chance to choose, and you chose Ernesto." I wanted him to get hysterical, to scream, to curse me, because maybe then I would feel there was still some connection between us. But his silence was more painful. It was a grief he lived through while I was still there, breathing the same air as him. The worst part was looking at Diego and Valeria and pretending nothing was wrong. Did they notice? Of course, children notice what adults try to hide, but I didn't know what to do or where to start. The truth is that it had already started, and it was too late to go back. The first bomb dropped less than a week later. Carlos had hired a lawyer, a childhood acquaintance of his specializing in family and labor law. At the same time, I found out that he had given the photos to the company's human resources department. An internal meeting was scheduled immediately. Ernesto and I were summoned. We tried to rehearse a narrative, something like a consensual relationship that occurred outside the work environment, but the compliance team only needed to see the images to understand that there was nothing more to discuss. We were fired with just cause. No severance, no compensation, no insurance, just the embarrassed silence of our colleagues and the cold stares of our superiors. Ernesto left the building before I did. I sat in the parking lot with a lost look, feeling the weight of everything crumbling. I tried to sue the company, claiming that Ernesto, as my direct superior, had coerced me for fear of professional reprisals, but it was in vain. Their defense was direct. "You have received productivity bonuses above average for the last 2 years. Where was the coercion?" And then came the second bomb. Carlos summoned me for a formal meeting with his lawyer present. I thought it would be about custody, child support, or the division of assets, but it was worse. He had done DNA tests on Diego and Valeria, and I had not even noticed. He discovered that neither of them was his. Ernesto was the father of both. The veracity of the report was irrefutable. Carlos handed me a copy with the same surgical calm with which he would remove a tumor. Without hesitation, without anesthesia, the pain came later, not because of the betrayal itself, but because he now had a weapon that could dismantle me. He told Isabella everything. She called me only once, not to curse me, but to thank me. She said she had finally been freed from a marriage she already suspected was rotten. She said her children, who were also Ernesto's, did not deserve to live with a father like that. The public humiliation was overwhelming. My friends disappeared. My parents could barely look me in the eye. I started hearing rumors, gossip from neighbors, and even anonymous comments on my social media. Being unfaithful was no longer a private matter. Now it was a spectacle. Carlos, as expected, did not stop there. In addition to the divorce, he filed a lawsuit against Ernesto for emotional distress and another against the company, alleging negligence in enforcing conduct rules between supervisors and subordinates. Unlike me, he had evidence, witnesses, and the system on his side. Ernesto tried to reach agreements, but Carlos wanted blood. He said he did not care about the money. He wanted everyone to pay, including me. "You will pay with everything you have and with everything you lost." Those were his words. I have never forgotten them. Meanwhile, I was trying to survive without a job, without a reputation, without family support. Ernesto left, of course. He said he needed space to think. In other words, he left me with 2 children, without child support, without help, without an apology. I tried to contact him several times, but he ignored me. When I did get a response threatening to sue him, he disappeared completely. And that is when I understood I had destroyed everything. My marriage, my career, my stability, and we had not even reached the most painful part yet. After everything that had happened, I did what any cornered woman would do. I sought a lawyer and requested a restraining order. I argued that Carlos was emotionally unstable and that I feared for my safety and that of the children. It was not difficult to get it. The judges here tend to protect the maternal figure, especially in cases involving minors. Carlos was forced to leave the house immediately. The irony. The house was still in his name, but now it was legally my home, and he could not come within 200 meters of it. It was then that the situation temporarily changed in my favor. Although the DNA tests proved that Diego and Valeria were not his children, the law recognized him as the registered father. And with that, he was ordered to pay child support and cover part of the household expenses. When his lawyer tried to appeal, the judge replied that the priority was the children and their stability. I confess I felt vindicated after everything he had done, the revelations, the lawsuits, the judgments. Now, he would have to support the children of the man he hated. Carlos refused to pay. He ignored the first demands, thinking he could reverse the decision. Seeing that this was not going to happen, he simply disappeared. He did not respond to notifications, did not show up for hearings, and then the arrest warrant for contempt arrived. He was arrested at a friend's house, and when I heard the news, I took a deep breath like someone who sees justice served. I thought, now he will understand what it is to lose control. But this satisfaction would not last long. I went to the jail. Yes, me. I took the children so he could see that despite everything, they still missed him. I gave him a bag with clean clothes, some cookies, and a bottle of water, and asked for help. I told him the house was getting expensive, that Ernesto had lost his job, and that the children needed things. Carlos's response was a slap in the face. He laughed. He asked me if I had any shame. He said it was now my lover's turn to pay for all this, and that I was not going to support other people's offspring. I was speechless. He ended by saying that those children were not his, and that if it were up to him, they would starve before he gave me a cent. His words hurt me more than anything else he had ever said to me. I left the penitentiary trembling with tears in my eyes, but still with an absurd rage inside me. I went back home, looked at the children playing on the living room floor, and for a moment, I doubted if it was worth continuing with all of this. But I had no other choice. I had to continue with the good work. I had to survive. Carlos got out of jail 4 months later, tired, thinner, but with the same look of contempt. He blamed me for everything. The arrest, the financial ruin, the lawsuits, the destruction of his life. He said I would pay one way or another. And at that moment, I knew he was not just speaking out of anger. He was planning something. The look in his eyes was no longer that of a wounded man. It was that of a man willing to burn everything around him just to see me in ruins. And he had not even started. Carlos got out of jail and went straight to the courthouse, where he discovered that he had completely lost custody of Diego and Valeria. The judge said that maintaining contact with him would be destabilizing for the children, as Ernesto and I were living together and would form a new family. It was a quick, almost cold decision. Carlos was in shock. I was told he left the hearing muttering things to himself with his fists clenched. I expected a reaction, but not like the one I would get. Not with that level of fury. For weeks, Carlos disappeared. He vanished from social media. No one knew where he was, not even his sister. Ernesto thought it was just pride. Deep down, I knew it was not. Carlos was methodical. When he disappears, it is not to forget, it is to plan. And that is exactly what happened. One ordinary morning, I took the children to school and went to work. Ernesto left shortly after for an interview. At 11:30 in the morning, I received a call from the neighbor screaming. Our house was on fire. The roof had collapsed. I was breathless. When the firefighters arrived, it was already too late. The structure was compromised and nothing could be saved. The experts pointed to the use of gasoline, but the street cameras did not record anything. The house had been opened with the remote control, and there were no signs of forced entry, a detail that almost everyone except me overlooked. The garage remote was in Carlos's car. Illegally, he was still a co-owner of the property. There was no way to prove he had done it, and even if he had, he knew exactly how to protect himself. A few days later, I found out he was in Cancun. He was staying at a simple but comfortable resort with everything paid for in cash. I was desperate. The children had to stay with my sister for days while I tried to reorganize my life from scratch. Ernesto did not want to go back to his mother's house, so we rented a small apartment with what little we had left. That was our new family. But in reality, it was just the emotional wreckage of everything that was left of the chaos I myself had helped create. Carlos returned to town weeks later as if nothing had happened. He showed up at his old job, picked up some belongings, and visited his lawyer. He acted naturally with a slight smile, as if he had won a silent war. His audacity disgusted me, but the worst part was that no one could stop him. He knew what he was doing. He left no trace. He had canceled his home insurance shortly before the fire, which saved him from fraud charges. And despite everything, he continued to pay his mortgage, which kept the bank quiet. It was at that moment that I realized that Carlos's revenge was not temporary. It was a continuous sentence. He did not want to hurt me and disappear. He wanted to drag me through the mud, to see me lose everything little by little with his own hands, and it was working. Ernesto was beginning to question the relationship. The children were confused and scared, and I just wished everything had been different, but it was too late. The fire that Carlos started in that house not only destroyed walls, it destroyed what little control I still had over my life. The fire never sent Carlos to jail, but he ended up there anyway. He was convicted of other crimes related to contempt, non-payment of child support, and violation of court orders. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. He served 2.5 years in a state prison. The news of his arrest brought me a mixture of relief and fear. Relief, because I knew he would be away. Fear, because even from prison, Carlos was still a shadow over my life. He received visitors, even from his lawyer, and everyone said he was planning something bigger. While he was in there, my life on the outside was falling apart. Ernesto, who had initially tried to be present, began to isolate himself. He said he was looking for work, but he lived on the sofa watching TV and drinking cheap beer. When I pushed him, he complained that I was too demanding. The truth is that he became complacent. He seemed to believe that I had to take care of everything on my own: the children, the rent, the food, the school, and myself. I no longer recognized myself in the mirror. I got an administrative job at a small transport company. The salary was limited, but it was enough to pay the bills. Over time, Ernesto's contempt began to manifest itself in an aggressive silence. He stopped touching me. We slept in separate beds, and soon, through text messages on his cell phone, I discovered that he was cheating on me with a former colleague. It was a huge blow. I had destroyed my marriage for this man. And not only was he abandoning me emotionally, but he was openly cheating on me. The argument we had was the ugliest of my life. When I confronted him, he did not deny it. He simply said, "I should know what I deserve." I moved towards him, shouting and pushing him. He grabbed my arms tightly like never before. His look was no longer one of contempt, but of hatred. For the first time, I feared for my safety. Diego and Valeria were in the room. I could not let them see this. I blurted out, "If you touch me again, you'll be arrested like the other one." And he let go, but the message was clear. Respect had died there. Since his confrontation with Carlos, Ernesto had been facing problems, or rather dysfunctions. He would not admit it, but I noticed. His attempts at sex almost always failed, and he blamed everything: stress, fatigue, the crisis, me. But after Carlos beat him, and I knew from third parties that it had been serious, he was never the same again. The man who offered me what Carlos could not became an emotional, financial, and sexual burden. A shadow of the lover who once bewitched me with his daring. Now he was just another burden in my life. The children were quieter. They started asking me questions about their father. They wanted to know why he never came, why he did not call, why he disappeared. I made excuses. I said he was working far away, that when everything was sorted out, they could see him. But I knew the truth would come out, and it would not be long. Carlos, even in prison, was still a ghost inside that house. And I, feeling the guilt eating me up completely, knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Ernesto and I could no longer stand each other. The apartment, too small for 2 adults and 2 children, was now a war zone. Daily arguments, piercing glares, a suffocating silence. I slept poorly. He spent his nights out. One day, Valeria woke up in the middle of the night crying and told me, "Daddy yelled at you in my dream." It was not a dream, my daughter. But how could I explain it to a little girl who just wanted a normal family? I had created hell, and now I was living in it. The night it all happened, Ernesto came back drunk. The children were already asleep, and I was on the sofa with the television on low volume. I calmly asked him where he had been. He responded with irony, joking. He talked about his lover. He said she was more feminine than I had ever been, that he regretted losing his marriage for me, that I had destroyed his life. I stood up angry and told him he was just a coward, that he had taken advantage of my weakness. That was the last straw. I do not remember everything clearly. I just heard his scream and felt the first push. My back hit the corner of the coffee table. Then came the kicks. 1, 2, 3. It seemed like he wanted to erase me from existence. The final blow was the cruelest. He pulled me by the arms, dragged me to the door, and threw me against the concrete frame. I felt a loud crack in my spine. After that, everything went silent. The pain was unbearable. My legs no longer responded. I screamed, but my voice seemed trapped in my chest. My upstairs neighbor, who heard everything and broke down the door, rescued me. Ernesto had fled. The ambulance arrived in 10 minutes, but the news I received at the hospital destroyed any remaining dignity. An irreversible fracture in my spine, paralysis from the waist down. You will not walk again, the doctor said bluntly. I could not look at myself in the mirror for days, not because of the wheelchair, but because the woman I saw there was the image of a silent and deserved punishment. Ernesto was found the next morning in the backyard of the building, having thrown himself from the 4th floor with no note, no explanation, just a body lying on the ground and a silence that screamed for weeks. The media reported it as a domestic tragedy, but for me it was the ultimate punishment. He left me alive to remember, but he left with all the answers. And although many may say he paid for his sins, the truth is that I was the one who suffered the pain. He fled. I stayed. Carlos was released from prison shortly after. Upon learning of everything, he filed the relevant lawsuits and obtained permanent custody of the children. He argued correctly that I was no longer physically or emotionally capable of caring for them. The judge agreed. Diego and Valeria moved in with his sister. Carlos picked them up himself. I saw them for the last time from the window of the clinic where I still live. They waved at me. I cried. I wondered if they would ever understand everything, if they would forgive me, if they would ever come back. Carlos has rebuilt his life. Today, he has a new partner, a comfortable home, and stability. His children call him father, even though they know they are not biologically his, and I live in a wheelchair with the support of Social Security and the compassion of others. I cannot walk. I no longer have my children. And even I myself have forgotten me. Sometimes, I think I died that day. They just forgot to bury my body. In the end, Carlos won, and I pay every day for what I did. But do I deserve forgiveness or just oblivion? Leave your opinion in the comments.